Okay, so you mentioned kids being potentially taken away from their parents if
Yeah.
they're not vaxxed.
Yeah.
Was that on the Quebec side?
It was on the Quebec side. I believe
Okay.
it was like a bill that they were trying to like introduce, but don't quote me on it.
Right.
But I do know that there was something going on where they were trying to get, basically, if your parent doesn't vaccinate you, then the state should take over. So then we were showing what happens when a state takes over your kid, and it's not a good thing.
So you were showing...
Yeah, so basically, like, because I work in a group home, I was like talking about what it looks like when a state takes over, or when the government takes over and tries to raise your kids, because most of the kids that I have, they didn't ask to be in that situation, but a lot of times they had to be taken out of the home because it was more dangerous than if they come in our group homes. But if you've ever worked in a group home, you know that group homes are not a walk in the park. And so, you know, especially during COVID, there were some things that the ministry was telling us to do that was just absolutely disgusting. Like, for example, like, some of our kids, if they came from a different group home and we couldn't like test them or really confirm, they had to go get a COVID test, but then they had to stay in their room for 2 weeks with a mask and not allowed to talk to anybody. They had to stay in their rooms the whole time. They never got sunshine. They never got physical activity outside. They were stuck in their room, and then even us, we couldn't talk to them because it could have transmitted COVID, and because we didn't get the tests back. So these kids were stuck in their rooms like animals for 2 weeks straight. Like, they wouldn't even do that in solitary confinement, and yet we were doing it to kids who have already been traumatized.
Yeah. Sounds like they don't have the kids' well-being as their top priority, you know?
No. Well, the mental health, absolutely not. All they're thinking about is, oh, COVID, COVID, COVID. And I'm like, it's the sniffles to them. Like, if they got COVID, they'd get maybe a little sick, you know? So why are we keeping them 2 weeks in their room? Like, you can clearly see that they have no signs or symptoms of COVID. They're fine. And if people are really that scared to be working there, then maybe don't work on the front lines if you're that terrified. Just a thought. A suggestion, really.
Yeah. Well, I heard that unvaccinated kids actually have a higher chance of survival after catching COVID than vaccinated adults, you know?
Yeah. Well, the issue is, you know, even in my group home, this is another kind of messed up thing that they did and are still doing currently, which is not accepting any kids that are unvaxxed. So if you are a child and you've just been taken away from your abusive home, and usually our home is like on the bottom tier, we get like the quote unquote worst kids, which I hate saying because there's no real bad kids. They just have really shitty files and probably have a lot of trauma. And so, but we get the ones that all the other group homes don't necessarily want. But let's say they're getting taken out of their home and we're the only ones with a bed left because we have 8 beds available and 5 different homes. Well, they will not let them in our home unless they're vaccinated. So I don't know what they're supposed to do with the kids if they have nowhere to go.
Right. Yeah. Sounds pretty terrible.
Yeah, it's quite awful. Especially knowing that, okay, like being vaccinated or not vaccinated, there's a very slim difference. So what is the point when a child is just trying to get away from abuse? Like, you have to think about the pros and cons, and we've stopped doing that. It's like, oh, COVID rules supreme on everything.
Right. Yeah.
That's not a thing. Well, I mean, it is a thing for most, but it shouldn't be.